what has everybody heard? I'm sure everybody's kind of gotten little bits in their email. You probably heard different news things, blah, blah, blah. Today, we're going to talk a bit about that and what it actually means. So, as we get started, one thing I want to share with you is, the reason why we as a company, why Radius has kind of stayed out of this fray and stayed safe and continued to make you guys safe is, in our entire history, we've never really imposed any kind of minimums like other brokerages do, right? Part of this lawsuit or the lawsuits that, have trailed was all about, how brokerages would mandate minimum compensation thresholds. And that's something that's never happened for us at Radius. So, that's how we've kind of managed to sidestep any issues or anything that could cause us damage as a company, as a team. So, that's a benefit to each and every one of you. So, so getting started and how we're kind of moving forward. So, oh goodness. All right. So some of the things that we're going to talk about today is we're going to talk about settlement terms in brief, help you guys understand exactly what happened and what you can anticipate. Some of the impact in the industry that's come down as a result of this settlement, procedural changes on how we do business going forward. We'll share some buyer agency and the corresponding agreements that, to be frank, we've talked about buyer broker agreements for almost a year now and why it's important to kind of utilize a buyer broker agreement. But going forward, we still strongly encourage that you guys are all utilizing a buyer broker agreement. And then come May 1st, we are probably going to institute a change to where you guys should be using a buyer broker agreement with every transaction and every buyer you work with. We'll talk a little bit about some scripting for success. I know some of you have concerns, which is how am I going to ask my buyer to pay my compensation? So we'll talk a little bit about scripting language and what some of the things you guys can do around that. And we'll wrap this up with some Q&A. Sound good, guys? Awesome. All right. So I would ask that any questions that you have, you either drop in the chat. Ela, are we recording this? I don't see recording started on this. So I want to make sure.
Yes, we have. We started recording already. So this.
Got it. Perfect. Yeah. Perfect. And any questions you guys may have, either drop them in the chat so that Ela can organize them, but hold all comments and such until the end of the presentation, okay? All right. Thank you, everyone. All right. So what's actually happened? So as you know, NAR has been going through a protracted legal battle for some time. It started with the Stitzer-Burnett trial that ended up to where there was a almost $1.6 billion settlement. And if you were to treble that, that kind of comes into somewhere around $5.1 million of damage that would have happened against NAR. Since that original lawsuit, there have been a myriad of copycat lawsuits, including one that happened in the backyard in California, in Northern California. And there was several trailing lawsuits that existed as well. I think part of the reason why NAR had opted to settle at this time is, there were many conditions around future lawsuits that would have impacted its members. So NAR and the plaintiffs in the Stitzer-Burnett and several other lawsuits have proposed a settlement that would end the litigation claims on behalf of NAR and its broker members. The agreement would resolve claims against NAR. It would release the liability for all of its member practitioners. And that's nationwide. It released the liability for brokerage owners that had less than a $2 billion volume. And again, that's nationwide, so all brokers across the United States. It released the liability for all realtor association MLSs. So what I mean by that is, I think some of you are part of it. There are MLSs that are not affiliated or a part of a realtor association. So those MLSs will actually have to opt in to the terms of this settlement and pay a subscription in order for them to be protected under this. So NAR has kind of thoughtfully, as they were preparing the terms of this settlement, provided a mechanism or an avenue for those non-association MLSs to actually be protected and safe as well. And of course, all of this is subject to court approval, right? But the truth of the matter is, there's a strong need for this for all parties to agree, primarily because it's in the best interest of all parties, right? But as far as compensation, and this is kind of what most of you have some concerns about, and let me say that there's no real reason to have huge concerns about this, because some of the things that have changed are primarily just how we communicate about compensation. It doesn't mean that compensation is going away. It literally means that compensation cannot be advertised any longer come mid-July on multiple listing services. That was, so if you'll recall, during the last trial and then subsequent copycats, NAR had already elected to have MLSs remove any kind of minimum threshold. So most MLSs allowed for you to put as low as $1 in the compensation category. But at that time, NAR said, okay, well, let's go ahead and allow you to zero this out. So NAR allowed its members to zero out the compensation. The big change that's happening here is any mention of compensation to a buyer broker is completely omitted from the MLS. I want to make sure you guys all understand that point. That means come mid-July, there will be no opportunities for you to input any kind of compensation that as a listing agent you might be paying to a buyer broker. That goes away completely. It doesn't mean that you can't compensate a buyer broker. Those agreements will be reached outside of any type of MLS platform. Okay, so consumers retain the right to still say, if a seller wants to pay a buyer's agent as a part of their marketing strategy, then they can still do that. It just has to be negotiated off of any MLS platform. Okay, does that make sense? Depending on the broker-consumer negotiations, methods of compensation that you guys are all familiar with will still be the same. If it's a fixed fee compensation paid directly by consumers to their agents, that's still allowable. The seller's still allowed to pay compensation to a buyer broker. The portions of the listing agent can pay a portion of their compensation to a buyer broker. Again, and compensation, as always, is 100% negotiable. But the big change in this case is there will be no opportunity to advertise any form of compensation to a buyer broker in the MLS. Okay. So what does it mean for home buyers and home sellers, right? I know a lot of you are concerned with, obviously this is national news. Home buyers and home sellers have actually, not in the agent remarks either, Brandon, no opportunity of any mention of compensation whatsoever. Okay. So what does the settlement mean for home buyers and home sellers? It preserves the choices that consumers have regarding the services and compensation of the practitioner that they're hiring. Listing brokers and sellers could continue to offer to the buyer broker if the MLS is not used as a form of communication. So that all stays the same. Sellers can communicate seller concession in the MLS. So if a seller wanted to pay a buyer's closing cost, let's say, they could communicate that directly in the MLS. So that's different. And then compensation, again, 100% negotiable. So you guys will still have the power to negotiate. There's not a huge change on that. You just won't be able to communicate any of these negotiations through the multiple listing service. Okay. Keep in mind, there are realtor association MLSs, and then there are privately held MLSs. Privately held MLSs still fall under the auspice of any terms of existing lawsuits, because they're not part of this. They would actually have to opt in to these agreement settlements in order to be protected. But, you know, and I'm sure some of you are a part of some of these non-association MLSs, okay? Rules around written agreements. So again, I want to stress this point, guys. We've been stressing this a long time. There are clear advantages and have always been clear advantages to a buyer-broker agreement. If you think about a buyer-broker agreement holistically, it is not different than a listing agreement that you may take with your seller, right? It defines the terms, it spells out what the expectations are and how you're going to be properly compensated. That's what a listing agreement's always done. That's essentially what a buyer-broker agreement does. It says, hey, I'm going to provide you with these services. These are the things I'm going to do for you, and this is what I expect as compensation. So it literally gives the buyer an opportunity to have their true representation. In other words, someone who has their back 100%, just like we at Radius have your back 100%. It gives them that opportunity to have true representation, okay? So come mid-July, and again, no date is firmed yet, but again, I want you guys to start to position yourself and get familiar with the forms that you should be using going forward. Come mid-July, these forms will be mandatory across the board. It's part of the settlement, okay? So any buyer-broker has to enter into a written buyer-broker arrangement or agreement with their buyers prior to showing any properties. So you're going to have a buyer-broker agreement in place prior to showing any properties. That's why I'm wanting you guys to get very comfortable right now with the buyer-broker agreement. We're going to do some additional trainings around the buyer-broker agreement to help you guys get comfortable. Stay tuned for the dates. They are forthcoming, but we really want you to get very comfortable with the documentation that you should be using so that you have 100% comfort around it, okay? And we'll walk you right up to the doorstep on how to use them and, you know, when you should actually start to have the conversations with the buyers that you're working with, okay? You know, some of the advantage to that are, you know, that buyer broker agreement as well. And some of the things that you're going to be doing is basically helping the buyer to understand the services that you're actually offering and, you know, the values that you're bringing forward. Some of the anxiety that some of you might be feeling is you've never had to really kind of wrestle with your value proposition as you work with a buyer. So, you know, helping you to kind of understand what your value proposition is, how to actually package that and present that to your buyer is critical at this stage. So those are some of the things that we'll help you with as we go over these buyer broker agreements so that you have a better understanding. And then finally, it provides the cost of your services, right? Again, if you're just looking at the document from a non-nebulous standpoint of, hey, I'm looking to work with you. This is the value that I provide. These are the services that I'm going to give you. And this is simply the cost for those services. That's all it is. It's a very simple process. Okay. All right. So as the settlement moves forward, as we start to kind of wrap this up, so to speak, the next steps in the settlement process, and again, I mentioned that there are some MLSs that you know, the defendants are still in litigation because they're not part of that NAR umbrella. Those folks will actually have to opt in to some of the features of this settlement in order to have some protection under that. So there are still some defendants that exist. Home Services of America, for example, is also a defendant that is not covered through this settlement process. I think all of you know there have been previous companies that settled, one for 86 million, one for 55 million. So that's all part of this settlement package as well. So there are good reasons for the court to approve this settlement. Again, it's in the best interest of all parties at this point in time, for consumers, for practitioners, for the plaintiffs. The review process could take months. So it could take several months for the court to actually say, all right, these are this. It's not uncommon to have objections in these types of things. So that could take some time, but it doesn't mean that the terms won't be implemented in advance of the final settlement. Okay. NAR's agreed to pay $418 million over a 4-year period. Now, if you think about it and kind of how settlements happen, some of these settlements or some of the asks in these lawsuits are in the billions. So if you think about $418 million that's settled over time, you know, it's a huge savings for NAR. And how does that impact you as a member of NAR or a local association? You know, the money's got to come from somewhere, let's be honest, guys. And so, you know, if it were in the billions, you know, it would have probably tapped our membership dues and kind of how much we're paying and you know, where it goes from there. I know some of you are probably still asking, you know, is there still value to NAR and to our local associations? You know, at this point in time, I say absolutely yes, right? I say absolutely yes. There's a lot of what these trade organizations do for us that help us to create value in the way we practice on a day-to-day. So, you know, as a company, we're also evaluating what the boards and what the national associations actually do for us. And over the next few weeks and months, we're going to be talking about this extensively so that we can make sure that we're doing the best thing for you guys and for our brokerage. We're always wanting to provide you with, you know, high quality, high value service, and us looking inwardly and actually seeing, you know, if there's value to these things in the future, and continuing to iterate on that only speaks to how we grow as a brokerage and continue to support you. Okay. Some of the reasons for this lawsuit as well, or for the settlement of this lawsuit, is NAR gets to avoid Chapter 11. I mean, money is not infinite, no matter who you are, no matter how big you are, right? And with mounting lawsuits and still bigger ones to come, you know, and especially in the amounts in the billions, at some point you have to figure out what are my next best steps. So I think NAR said, look, we could go bankrupt, but if they went bankrupt, they would have also caused damage to its more than 1 million members. So I think that's, you know, part of the reasons why they decided to make some settlement. And again, ever since the first judgment of that of the first Stitzer Burnett, NAR's been tirelessly working to make sure that it's doing the best thing for its members, and this is the ultimate outcome of that. Okay. And then also part of the settlement process avoids additional needs for appeals and removes the uncertainty. Think about how some of you had been feeling for a period of time. What are next steps? I think lots of us have been kind of sitting back with bated breath, but it allows us to pause and get a sigh of relief because now at least we know that these things aren't looming. Again, you know, part of what Radius did and has always done is made sure that we established no minimum caps. We fully believe in you and how you run your business, and we support that. So if you only wanted to charge 2%, that's your choice. That's your choice as a business, right? And keep in mind, other brokerages have absolutely established threshold minimums for all of their partners, or for all of their agents underneath that brokerage umbrella. 4, 5, 6%. Those were all mandated by the brokerage themselves. So that's a significant difference of who we are as a brokerage and why we continue to thrive and grow, particularly in changing times such as this. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about a buyer's agency. So a real estate agent is also a broker. A broker is a real estate agent. So theoretically, when we talk about buyer's agency involves a buyer and their real estate agent broker. The agent aids the buyer in locating and purchasing a home, negotiates on their behalf, and represents their interest. Buyer agency is a specific contract relationship. The reason why I wanted to really kind of emphasize what a buyer agency is these are talking points these are talking points that allow you to have meaningful conversations with the buyers that you're working with, right? Again, I want you guys to all take a deep breath, remove the fear from the table in regards to how you plan on negotiating with your buyers going forward. It's merely you, as you've always done, the great business that you've always given, just simply saying, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, these are the services I'm providing you. This is how I want to proceed forward. And these are next steps, right? Again, you're just asking for a commitment for the services that you provide. Again, there's no, a seller could continue to pay a buyer broker compensation, obviously negotiated, but it just cannot be in any platform of an MLS. Okay. I want to make sure you guys understand that and hear that completely. So when we talk about the forms that are necessary and that the things that we're going to have you start to comply with and start to really integrate in your business, any of you who've had an opportunity to use Mel or are in the app every day, we've got a TXM platform that is going to introduce these documents for you. Again, the more ease of use that we can provide to you guys on a day-to-day, the more we're going to do, including the addition of these forms that are necessary for you to complete your buyer agency or your buyer broker agreements. Okay, so stay tuned. Those of you who are using the app daily, how many of you guys have started to play around in Mel? If you guys have not started to play with Mel, play with Mel. Mel's awesome, right? So we as a company, again, tech forward, tech tools, these are things that are going to make your day that much easier. So we are right at the 2 billion threshold. So, we are pretty safe. We're protected under the terms of this agreement. So we are right there. We are right there. So we are well covered. Okay. So as far as buyer broker agreements in California, that you have the BRBC, which is the buyer representation and broker agreement, that came out December of 2023, along with the ABCD, and yes, that is a real form, the anticipated broker compensation disclosure, the BTA, which is the buyer transactional advisory, the cancellation of buyer representation, notice of broker involvement, which is the MBIP, and then the SPBB, which is the seller payment to buyer broker. Did you guys catch that last one? Sellers can still pay buyer broker. And if the flow of these forms seem familiar, it's very similar, for that listing process. You can cancel if I decide I don't like my buyer and my buyer doesn't like me, we can part ways and no harm, no foul. But again, these are just mechanisms for you guys to actually have an opportunity to now have that meaningful discussion with your buyers about how you want to do business with them and how they want to do business with you. Okay. I will be sharing these slides with you guys along with some additional handout and information post this presentation. But we are going to be doing this presentation multiple times, and there will be other follow-ups in regards to understanding the buyer broker agreements and how you can start to work with them today. Okay. So stay tuned. You guys will be seeing some rooms announced shortly to cover this material. In Florida's had a form in play for 8 years now, which is the exclusive buyer brokerage agreement, the single agent agreement. In Texas, it's the residential buyer tenant representation agreement. And in Georgia, yes, you act as a transaction broker as well. In Georgia, it's the RE 115 commission acknowledgement form. So each state has a form. Now, with states like Washington and Oregon, so Washington was actually a big trendsetter. Washington actually saw a lot of these things coming way back in 2019. So they started to implement changes on, how commission was talked about. And guys, in real estate, buyers paying commission to their prospective real estate professionals has existed forever. Certainly on the commercial side, that's something that is a daily occurrence on the commercial side. So it's a matter of how we shift language and how we adjust. Let's see. I need to excuse me for just a second, guys. I was just tagged to refresh my slides. Give me 1 second. I'm not able to do that if I stop sharing. So let me just kind of plow through and I'll refresh. So anyway, changes in Washington State. So they saw this coming. They started to already take the commission notion off the table. So in Washington State, there is no commission that's mandated to a buyer broker. It's always been literally just It's always been just since 2020, I believe. They've had the ability to negotiate commissions away from the MLS. Washington State does not require you to be a part of a realtor association either. So you've got some people in the state that may be a part of it, but most aren't. So that's different. But they, again, were a very big trendsetter. So you guys have heard me talk about TXM for a bit, which is our transaction management suite. And, this is a great opportunity right now for us and for you. So as I talked about us making your lives a lot easier, to have the transaction management suite in the palm of your hand is literally next steps. It's kind of cutting edge. You guys are able to do all of that, from your phone. That'll be rolling out shortly. We should, probably within the next 30 to 60 days, plus or minus, that should be available to you. So again, all of these forms that you guys use on a daily basis will all be in your transaction management suite, which will be in your Radius Office app in the palm of your hand. Okay. All right, let's talk a little bit about language that you can use. I won't belabor on this because I know a lot of you have questions and I want to get to those. But the truth of it is it's all about how you're up-leveling the conversations that you're having with your buyers, right? And some of that is really understanding what is the messaging that you're wanting to convey to your buyers. So, I want to work with you, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer. I want to ensure that you have a clear understanding of how I'll be compensated for the services I provide. It's typical for a buyer to pay the agent's commission, which allows us to work directly with you with your best interest at heart, right? I mean, to just be clear and direct with the people that you're working with. This is a subtle change. It's not the ground just broke open change. This is just a subtle change. And it's an opportunity of learning for each and every one of you as an agent to we do this on the list side. We negotiate what our compensation will look like. We're merely going to do this on the buy side. So we've got Joseph Flannery on the call, who's the head of Radius Loan Desk. And I want Joseph to talk a little bit about what that looks like. Are you able to finance the compensation, the buyer's compensation and the loan and all that? Joseph, are you on?
I sure am.
All right, Joseph,
Thanks,
take it away.
Great. Well, they said when we got into real estate, there was never going to be a boring day. And so that's certainly true for this week. It's an honor to be on the call. For those who don't know me, I joined Radius late last year to lead the mortgage division called Loan Desk. This is my 13th year in the mortgage industry. Prior to that, I was a practicing attorney. And I've seen many changes in mortgages, and some of them have to do with compensation as well. And what I have found is whenever there's been a change in the rules of the game, there's always been opportunities that have emerged, and that the companies and entrepreneurs that can be most nimble to adapt and to identify consumer pain points usually can gain market share. And so I don't view this change any different. So ultimately, I think whenever rules change, you have to think about how is this going to, where are the opportunities that lie? Is there a marketing opportunity to engage more clients? Is there new business model opportunities like we had kind of alluded to? And one thing that I wanted to call to your attention that we've been working very diligently at Radius is this idea of dual licensing for our agents. So for those who don't know, Radius also has a mortgage division, and that's called Loan Desk. And when I first met with the executives of Radius, I had pitched them this idea of enabling agents to be dual licensed. And part of the reason why I pitch that is because I've seen it work and be successful at my previous company. And essentially, by being dual licensed, you would be able to be compensated on the mortgage. And we have different options and ways for you to be compensated through the mortgage, whether you're acting as the actual mortgage advisor or whether or not you're just compliantly playing a co-pilot role on the mortgage, where you're a licensed mortgage loan originator, but you're leveraging the inside sales team and inside loan desk team to provide more of the advice and fulfillment. So this is an opportunity for you to earn ancillary compensation on buy-side deals. Let's be honest, mortgages are not going away. We don't have a sudden influence, impact of cash buyers. Those would be great,
Right.
but mortgages are quite the necessity. And in some ways, mortgages being commoditized makes it challenging because it's hard to differentiate yourself, but also that creates opportunity because this is your client and you have the opportunity to maximize your earnings of this client, whether that be on both on buy-side representation as well as on the mortgage compensation front. And so if we have not engaged already, I really want to present this opportunity for you so that you can try to model whether or not it makes sense for your business. One of the things that excites me most is the technology that we're building for the Radius Office app is going to integrate mortgage. So if you are going to be a dual license agent, there's going to be efficiencies and a better consumer experience by integrating mortgage within your own business. So when you go into your app, you'll be able to get real-time status updates on your clients on their pre-approvals. You'll get real-time status updates on whether or not they've applied. And ultimately, it'll be more efficient as far as just clicking a button to have your client start their pre-approval. And this is all because we're doing both in an integrated manner. So that's what excites me the most, is that we're going to deliver to the consumer one integrated experience for both real estate service and mortgage. And you can absolutely take part in that and be able to take in the compensation that is earned on the mortgage side, but it has to be done compliantly. So if you have not already met with me, please reach out. I'm happy to kind of go through our dual license opportunity and provide a roadmap of where this may go. And then to answer your question, Dee, there's always going to be ways to potentially make the numbers work. I can certainly get back about financing compensation into the loan, but keep in mind there's loan to value requirements, there's asset requirements. Maybe there's a new business model where there's like silent seconds that go on to pay agents like that. I'm just kind of thinking out loud here, but again, it goes back to what I initially led with, is that whenever there's changes in the rules, it creates new business opportunities. And so that's how I'm approaching this, and I would encourage everyone to do the same.
Love it, Joseph. And guys, if you haven't had a chance to meet Joseph, definitely get an opportunity, get some time scheduled with him. At the very least, just hear what the MLO Plus could do for you, and kind of help that to build your brand and provide some additional supplemental income for your business. Definitely something that I don't think you're going to find anywhere else in the industry. So one of those things that we're bringing to you as just a way for you to continue to grow and develop your business model. I'm seeing in the chat, some of you are talking about the potential of an increase in dual agency. And let's just kind of look at that for a second. If there's no monetary incentive for the listing agent, why would the listing agent want to enter into dual agency, right? Part of the reason why dual agency happens is for many buyers, they believe that right now, if I go directly to the listing agent's already being paid by the seller for both the buy side, sell side. If that's removed from the listing agent's quiver, then there really is no drive for the listing agent to want to assume agency with the buyer. Guys, keep in mind, it is to the buyer's advantage to have clear and accurate representation for a real estate transaction. It always has been. Now, this just merely escalates the opportunity for you to be that true practitioner. I mean, literally, you're looking like you're wearing a cape, right? You're pulling off miraculous things. And if there is a way to roll at least some of the costs that would of the buyer broker compensation into the loan, then if there's a way, we'll definitely find it. Okay. Let me flip through a couple of these scripts just to give you guys an idea. Again, I won't read through all of them. We will be sharing this deck with you along with some additional handouts, some Q&As in regards to NAR that may not have been answered. But I'd like to get to your Q&A right now. So as we're, oops, what is wrong with my deck here? All right. What is going on here? All right. Not sure what's happening with the deck, guys. But anyway, let's just go ahead and skip to some Q&A. So I'm seeing lots of Q&A in the chat. First of all, was this helpful, guys? Did this help to kind of put some things in perspective for each and every one of you? Good, good. So let's see. From Aaron, is there a way to find out if the seller is offering BAC prior to touring the property? This will affect which homes may first-time homeowners can buy, who can buy. So that's a great question, Aaron. And I would say this. I would say what this is going to force you to do is have more meaningful conversations with the listing broker, right? You guys are going to be picking up the phone and texting a lot more than you probably ever have, because there won't be any mention of compensation on the MLS. So it's going to force you guys to call the seller and say, the listing agent, and say, hey, look, I've got a client who's interested in this property. Is there any cooperation that exists from the seller? So now that gives you a platform to work from. So you're going to be having more direct conversations with the listing agent. Leon, question.
Yeah, Heidi. Is there any clarity on whether a link in MLS, or say if you link disclosures.io to MLS, where then you could talk about buyer broker compensation? Do we know anything about that? Where it's not discussed directly in MLS, but there's a document or a web page linked on, or there's a link somewhere on MLS to that effect.
Totally makes sense. I don't know that, right? We're still early in terms of this phase, but I would say this. I would say that anything that associates with the MLS, there's probably not going to be an opportunity for you to link to a document that actually talks about compensation to a buyer broker, right? Because that's just merely a shell game, right? It's like, no, I didn't actually say it on the MLS. I put a link that referenced this information. But
it would be good if we could, come up with something as an industry or as a company.
I agree.
Just for those of us who are listing agents, I think we're going to be driven absolutely insane with the volume of calls. Hey, do you offer broker co-op?
I agree with you. Yeah, I agree with you for sure. And who knows? There could be ways of there's a website, there's a link to, as you were just saying, but I don't know that definitively. We'll continue to dig and research and make sure that we come up with all the correct answers for you as we move forward.
We've got some questions at the very top of the chat too.
Okay, let's work those.
So let's start from there, and then we'll get to everyone that's got their hand raised. But I want to make sure the people that started at the top get their questions answered as well.
Thank you for that. Boji, how's it going? How do they enforce how are they going to enforce the buyer broker agreement? That's a great question. And again, knowing how regulatory bodies exist, there's not enough manpower to really keep enough oversight. So I would imagine some of this is self-policing, and we know we have those in our communities that are great policers of not only themselves but others. but I will keep you posted on what that enforcement's going to look like. I think more importantly, it's important that you just get comfortable with the use of it. So let's stay focused on that, guys, and let's actually make that as part of our weekly priority this week, is to, at the very least, if you've not seen it, to take a look at your buyer broker agreement for your particular state. That way you know what the language is, because it's really all about language. And sometimes the language in those agreements will give you talking points. They will give you cues that you can utilize when you're speaking with your buyers. But get comfortable with the documents first. I'll continue to do additional research to see what the enforcement process might look like. But I think as a company, we really want to lean in and stay on the upside of right in terms of the utilization of these documents, okay? Right now, I strongly recommend, but I think by May 1st, we're probably as a company going to, make it that all of you are using that. So I'll keep you posted on that. How would you be able to show that you are offering this if not in the MLS? Again, because and that's Brandon. Hey, Brandon. If the negotiations are going to be happening outside of the MLS, again, keep in mind, guys, the negotiations aren't going away. They just can't be advertised in the MLS, which was part of the main tenet of these lawsuits, right? It's an antitrust lawsuit that we were colluding with MLSs, or NAR specifically was colluding with MLSs to price fix, which is why it's being removed from the MLS as part of the settlement, to show that, no, it's 100% negotiable. We've always said it's 100% negotiable, and this is how we're moving forward to show that it's 100% negotiable. We'll just take it off of the MLSs completely, okay? So the ability to negotiate still exists. It just won't be on the MLS. Not in the agent remarks, Brandon Thompson. Won't be in the agent remarks. Nowhere on the MLS will you be able to speak about compensation. Nowhere on the MLS. What if you entered the listing prior to? Great question, Boji. So any of you who are in contract right now, this does not affect you. This does not affect your agreements at this point in time. These won't actually take place until sometime in July. So if you're in contract right now, if you've got existing listing agreements in the MLS, you are safe at this point in time. Any grandfathered business at this point in time, the way you're practicing is perfectly okay. All right, Anthony's question. Heard from an attorney that some MLS have seller concessions, and his understanding is that it may be allowed by state. Seller has agreed to pay buyer compensation. We had this talk yesterday, Kathy Arzad and I, in regards to compensation to a buyer broker, and could that be consistent with a seller concession? I think we landed on there's a potential or a possibility for that money's paid out by the seller, because again, it's the seller, and these are all seller choices, that the seller says, you know what, as part of the concession of this purchase, I'm going to provide compensation to a buyer broker. But I don't know that to be true. Again, this is a manipulation of language, Anthony. So I don't want to commit to that and say, sure, if the seller says this is a concession, it's okay. I'm sure that smarter minds than me have already kind of thought this out. But stay posted, Anthony. I'll dig a little deeper and see if that, in fact, could be the case. Okay? Let's see. How would you be able to, Brandon, how would you be able to show that you are offering this? If not, we answered that already. Let's see. Janet heard the same thing. Sandra, can you email agents eBlast your listing and mention the seller's offering buyer's commission? I would 100% say yes on that, because it is not on an MLS platform. So if you send out an e-blast, hey, everybody, I've got 1234 Main Street coming on the market. Can't wait for you to see it. And oh, yes, by the way, seller is offering buyer broker compensation. Hooray, I'm at your listing, right? So I think you're probably pretty safe if you're doing an e-blast. Let's see. So if we get a call from a new buyer we have not met that's looking to tour a home, we would need to have them sign a buyer broker agreement before showing them the property. And the answer is yes. And I will tell you this, Brandon, this is not a new concept in real estate. We've talked about this for a long period of time. So if you think about it in this way, what a great way to qualify a potential buyer, because we all know that there are buyers who want to see things but have either no intention to buy or no ability to buy from a financial perspective. So, having them to sign a buyer broker agreement is an indication of commitment. And that's what we all want, right? You wouldn't list a house with a seller just kind of quasi on the fence going, I might use you, I might sell, I'm not 100% sure, right? You'd get a commitment. It's a commitment of work, right? Each and everything that we do on a daily basis is a commitment of work. Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, I'm going to be providing you with my time, my excellent services, everything that will enable you to fulfill your dream, which is to be a homeowner. And this is simply what I charge for that, right? If we can start to make that mental shift of language and start to get comfortable with that, this is going to go very smoothly. And again, Kathy and myself and others, we will be working with all of you to get a better understanding and better grip of how these documents can actually benefit you as you go forward in your business models, okay? Let's see. Ray Joseph, hey Ray, how will this change open houses? That's a good question, Ray. If you're asking if you're conducting an open house, will you have to have a buyer broker agreement in place? I think the same holds true, which is if I'm an agent and I'm bringing a buyer to an open house, that means that I've already met with that buyer, and because it's me actually the procuring cause in a sense for that for the buyer to see that property, you would have to have a buyer broker agreement in place. If the buyer found the property on their own, they saw it online or something like that, and they just showed up, they're not working with a licensed professional. They're just a consumer who's looking at a product that's on the market. So I don't think there's a drastic change in terms of how open houses will be conducted. Let's see. What about a buyer looking to see our seller's property? Would we still need the buyer broker agreement prior to showing it? You're talking about an unrepresented buyer. If you're talking about an unrepresented buyer, I would say the same would probably hold true. The buyer could, if the buyer saw it on their own, they weren't planning on hiring a practitioner, you could still show it because they're not the licensee. They are just a consumer. But if it is an agent bringing a buyer to your seller's property, that agent would need a buyer broker in place. So guys, if you think back to COVID, and my brain is foggy, I can't remember the form, but when we were in COVID times, remember when we had to submit that form in advance before seeing the property? And gosh, somebody help me out, put it in the chat what that form was called, because I'm not
PED form.
What was it?
PED form.
Yeah, the PED, that's what it was. Thank you, Lavanya. The PEDS form, we had to do that in advance of showing any property. So this is really not that much different, right? It's just having the buyer commit to you. And isn't that what we all want? We want our customer base to commit to us because we're providing them excellent service. We don't need to worry about, are they going to pick someone else because of something else? You want to lock in that commitment early. Michelle, hey Michelle, how's it going? Do you think there will ever be a national MLS? That's a great question. They've been lobbying for a national MLS for about a decade. But, again, it's revenue that's prevented a national MLS from actually taking shape. We couldn't even get it together in California because you do have some independent MLSs that said, no, this is going to impact how I make a living. I don't want to do that. But, some of these changes could reopen the door for these conversations that would be beneficial for both the practitioner and for its consumer base. So good question.
Will you go ahead and stop sharing your slides real quick? Just so that we
sure.
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 Thank you very much.
Better? Okay. All right. Let's see. Tim. Hey, Tim. Is radius above? Oh, we answered that. We are right at 2 billion. Aaron, I think I answered your question. Jess, Sam, Boji, I answered your question. Liz, you'll need to educate your client. I think she was responding to Boji's. Jazz, any rules regarding dual compensation? I'm sure you mean dual agency. And again, I don't think any of those things are changing, but I do think you're going to see a reduction in dual agency as a result of what these things are being laid out. Because again, there's no clear advantage for a listing agent any longer. You know, unless the listing agent has already negotiated from a marketing perspective with their seller to say, look, Mr. Seller, I understand these rules are in place now, but we want the widest and best audience, and this is how we get there, right? That's still business as usual. It's continuing to do what we always do. It's us just beefing up our language a little bit more effectively so that all the parties that we're dealing with have a clear understanding of why there's value in doing what we're proposing to do, okay? And it could be, there are also scenarios to where the seller's willing to give X, like the seller says, I'll contribute $2,000 to the buyer broker, in which case the buyer broker agreement from the buy side could say, if the agent said, well, my fee is normally $5,000, that the buyer could contribute the additional $3,000 in order to make the agent whole. So there's a myriad of variations that could happen with this. So, you know, guys, stay creative, keep thinking forward, because that's the thing that's going to keep each and every one of you in business. Keep thinking forward. This is new for all of us. And in some ways, this is not new, right? Most of us kind of expected some changes to happen in the near term. We just didn't know when. And now we have confirmation of this is how we're proceeding. But each and every one of you will still wake up tomorrow and think about what deal do I need to do next, right? So I want to reinforce that. Joseph Ivan, hey Joseph, do you foresee it still being 5 or 6% commissions and listings? So I'm going to say this: there are $200 attorneys and there are $2,000 attorneys. What's the difference between those two attorneys? They both practice law. They may be in the same business line, but you've got one who is that tried and true professional that has a clear understanding of their business model and how they want to propel themselves forward. So if you, in fact, are that type of agent and everybody recognize your value, and you're able to communicate your value effectively, I don't see why you wouldn't be able to charge a 5 or a 6% commission. It's going to depend on the relationship that you have with your sellers or with the customer base that you're looking to do business with. So I don't think those things will change, but it does depend on, you know, the conversations that we're having. And I want to stress this: you guys need to look at the conversations you're having now, and if any adjustments need to be made, not how am I going to make adjustments, but is my pitch so solid that of course they're going to want to do business with me? Or is your pitch needing some tweaking to make sure that you're going to be in business tomorrow, right? And the goal of obviously all of you are on the call with us today, so you're obviously going to be in business tomorrow. So maybe it's just an opportunity for us to create some additional growth opportunities for you to be that 5 or 6% agent. Let's see. Melinda, concessions to the buyer is allowed on the MLS. That is correct. Concessions to the buyer are allowed on the MLS. Again, you can communicate concessions to the buyer. That's why I said, somebody mentioned earlier, could I technically say, you know, sellers paying the buyer's commission? It still feels like language to the commission, and we want to stay away from any kind of red flag language, but definitely let me research it more effectively so that you guys have a good, clear answer on that. Let's see. Lavanya, and how am I doing on time? We still got a couple minutes.
We have lots of raised hands too. A lot of people who want to ask questions.
Yeah, lots in the chat too. So let me get to that. We will be loosening lots of buyers to new home builders who do not need agents to do paperwork. New homes, you know, let me get back to you on new homes, right? Because that's a kind of a slippery slope as it is. Let's see, when doing a broker open, put a sign showing that the seller will offer buyer commission. I would think that, that's a safe haven for sure, Ray. Let's see. Svetlana, let me take a hand up.
Thanks, Dee. I just wanted to make a comment because I work with so many buyers, is that having them sign this buyer agreement on the first showing is almost going to be impossible. They've never even met you. It's almost like you have to do it if, you do a one free, and then if they want to continue working with you, you have them sign that agreement, for the second showing.
I love
I
what
don't
you're
see
thinking, but there's not going to be an opportunity of a one free. So let's talk about, not in this session because we've only got a couple minutes left, but let's get a session together to talk through how you can actually get the commitment, because there are ways to get the commitment. Okay.
Okay.
Trey, what about showing time? Could a listing agent post buyer broker commission paid on showing time? Showing time is not an MLS product. Let me double check on these things, Trey. Again, it's also new. I need to look at some of the ancillary providers and if there is any kind of sanction or language in those. But great comment about showing time. Would this force more buyers to have to pay their agent broker? Yes, potentially, yes. Absolutely. Compensation could squarely sit on the buyer to compensate their buyer broker, for sure. Jamie, if we have a current existing listing, do we need to add paperwork? No. If right now you don't need to add paperwork, just start to get familiar with it is what I'll say. So what is the best form to submit with the offer to get paid by the seller? Rasha, let me come back to that. As a matter of fact, I'd love to cover that in a class. And again, I will be sending out within 24 hours or so our class schedule on buyer broker agreements. Okay. Donna Norby, I'll take two more and then we'll wrap it up, guys. We're at 10:58. What if the listing agent doesn't compensate and the buyer can't afford, so there's no compensation? Some realtors may steer the clients who do. Could we get into ethics violations? Good question, Donna. I think that requires a little bit more thoughtful consideration. Let me get back to you on that, okay? Emily, last question. Emily, are we allowed to accept compensation from both the buyer and the seller? And the short answer to that is yes. Okay, guys, I hope this was incredibly useful to you. Again, we'll have other sessions on this. We've recorded this particular session, so I hope it clarified some questions that you may have had. This is an ongoing, guys. This isn't a one-off. We're not going to just leave you hanging out to dry and have further questions. We're going to continue to kind of work through this. But I appreciate the time and attention all of you have taken today to kind of participate in this. Looks like we have a pretty good crowd. So again, feel free to reach out to me directly. Reach out to your success manager. If you've got questions, reach out to support@radiusagent.com. And then we'll just keep working from that. Sam, did you have something you wanted to add?
Unless anyone objects, could we pull a little bit of an audible here? Can we work through some of the other questions and let's hear some other voices? Of course, anyone can drop if they have something at 11 or 2 or whatever time zone you happen to be in. But instead of reaching out to you, offline, there might be a lot of overlap in some of these questions. So
cool.
If we could just stay on, let's shoot for another 15 minutes.
Oh, that's great.
And let's hear from some more of the agents.
Other questions, guys?
I'm looking in the queue right now, and let's start with Ray.
With Ray. Okay. I'm sorry. I'm trying not to push over the 2 billion. Ray does good business.
Ray, you had your hand raised though, right? If you guys want to talk, now it's free form. Just everybody ask your questions openly.
So one of the things I was just go through just the standard things we normally do, which is, like open houses. When someone comes into an open house, how do we handle that?
Mm-hmm.
But one of the things I was thinking about is if a buyer is going to pay the commission directly, I mean, usually they're struggling with the down payment and they're going to pay me 2.5%. one, could that be excluded from your property tax basis, which would be kind of nice. And I was thinking during a listing presentation, saying if you offer to pay the buyer compensation, the buyers, you will have more money for a down payment and make it easier to qualify for a loan. So how can we spin these things to an advantage? You know, in every way possible. For example, listing saying we will offer a commission. The buyers can offer a commission to the salesman, so it's built into the price.
Yeah, that's a great comment, great question, Ray. Yeah, I think we continue to kind of lay out scenarios to where we're coming up with feasible methods of actually kind of having this happen from the seller side. I mean, you know, a lot of it really sits on that, how we're having conversations with our sellers, and why it's important that they have at least some contribution to the buyer broker, because it is a marketing effort, right? And I think we all know that it's part of what we do to get a listing sold. And so if we position ourselves with the seller to kind of constantly talk about marketing versus listing, because listing means nothing, right? It's, you know, I can put a sign in the yard. If it never sells, it's nothing. But how do I market your home to get it sold? These are my methods. These are my strategies.
Because if a seller doesn't offer a commission to the buyer's agent, that's going to eliminate people from showing the property.
That's right.
And the whole idea of offering the buyer commission is you want those guys to bring in
100%. Yeah, 100%.
So there's a huge advantage in that.
That's right. Agreed.
A marketing strategy could be, so I put it in the comments, but a marketing strategy could be that the seller offers a credit to the buyer during the contract.
And for the buyer to be able to compensate the buyers. Yeah, absolutely.
Compensate the buyer's agent.
Yep.
At that point.
Yep.
That could be a marketing strategy.
Yeah, as long as it's okay with the lender, that's where lenders
right. And as long as it's in the contract,
stated
that way, it can work, or it can be a marketing strategy as well as help the buyer and the agent at the same time.
For sure.
Love it.
Our next hand raised is Ashla. So Ashla, are you here?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yep.
I'm really confused because, you know, I do list quite a bit of properties, and I'm closing 2 this week where I represented the buyer and I kept the full listing commission. So is that changing?
So what's changing, Asla, is that the seller does not necessarily have to provide compensation to a buyer broker. That's what's changing in July. So everything that you've got going on is still kosher and copacetic. You can still do what you're doing right now. But come July, there are going to be some changes in that, which means that the seller, and by the way, it's always been that. Seller doesn't have to offer anything. But it makes sense for the seller to, again, from a marketing perspective. But come mid-July, there is no mandate that the seller has to pay a buyer broker compensation.
I understand that, but in the event that they do, can I still work with both the seller and the buyer? Because we act as transaction brokers.
Yeah, you're transactional brokers. Yeah, absolutely. You can still work with the buyer and the seller, for sure. Absolutely. None of that changes. You'll still be able to work and with the buyer and the seller.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure. Donna, you had your hand up. Donna Norby.
Yeah, sorry about that. I just wanted to go on the tail end of that because, you know, I've been doing this a long time. I'm sure there's a lot of people, but when you have agents, I'm not saying go rogue, but it's just so interesting to see that if they don't offer compensation, I just don't understand how later on, like, you know, you could say, oh, let's not go there because they don't offer compensation in your head. So you're not taking them there, but your fiduciary duty is to your buyers to
100%.
Take them to whatever they want. So I'm scratching my head going, what the heck is going to happen? Especially if agents, you know, we have rogue agents. That's really basically.
You touched a great point, right? And, you know, long-standing problem, right? I mean, before when it was, as it exists right now, agents would kind of structure their tours based on this one's paying 3%, this one's paying 3%, this one's paying 2%, and show the 2% last, right? Because there's no direct, right? We all know that to be true.
Yes.
But in this case, and you brought up a great point, there is still the fiduciary obligation to your buyer, irrespective of compensation, to show them a property they want to see. But again, some of that will be mitigated, Donna, with your buyer broker agreement, because in order for the buyer to see those properties, you're going to have to enter into an agreement. And that's when you have the discussion about what compensation looks like within the boundaries of that agreement.
I see. So if some offer it, great. If some don't, the ones that don't, then you're going to have to negotiate with them, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Makes sense.
Yeah.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Sure. Melinda, you have your hand up.
Yeah, hey Dee.
Hey, Melinda.
Hey, how's it going?
Good.
I have been listening to a lot of commentary on this yesterday, and can you go back to the time frame of when that buyer broker agreement should be signed? Because some of the commentary I've been listening to is saying that it's comparing it basically to a listing agreement, which I get and I think could be actually really good for the industry.
Sure.
But you don't necessarily have to have a listing agreement to do some work for that client prior to listing their property. Like sometimes sellers aren't ready to put their house on the market. So, we get them, cleaners or this, or we work for them and we don't necessarily have an agreement yet. We're kind of working for them. We're not advertising or marketing their property yet, but kind of the same thing with the buyer's agreement. Where is it coming from that you can't show without a buyer's agreement? The things that I've been reading and listening to is that you can show you can't write in an offer until you have a buyer broker agreement.
Yeah, this is the information I'm drawing from is directly from the NAR settlement page, which you guys will all get that in the handouts. So it's coming directly from that. This is directly the list of what's in the settlement. But I did want to say one thing is, obviously on a listing agreement, that's an employment contract, right? And I just kind of want to stress, you guys should never be doing work without an employment contract, right? If you were in a traditional job environment, would you start working without an agreement? Probably not, right? So on the buy side, it's clear in terms of the language that come mid-July, you're not going to be able to start to show property until you have a buyer broker agreement in place.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Jim, question.
Yeah, Dee, it's my mic. Yeah, Dee, quick question. What do you think this is going to affect the agent's income? Most of our agents are buyer's agents. And what are your thoughts? I hear, some of the articles like 30% of the agents will get out of business.
I've heard.
What are your thoughts?
I've heard some similar chatter. I've heard as much as potential contraction by 400,000 agents. But Jim, look at it this way. There've always been agents who hold a license but don't necessarily do any business, right? A market and a half ago, we had a lot of agents shake out because they didn't know how to do business beyond what the gravy train years were, right? Remember that 2002 to 2009 kind of series. So, the way I look at it, honestly, is this is a clear opportunity for agents to engage in additional learning opportunities so that they are better practitioners. And, there's no better time than now for this to happen. Whenever there's change always creates opportunities. Always. Right. No matter how devastating the change was, the opportunity is clear and specific. And this is one of those clear and specific moments. This is where you as team leads can actually reach out and really investigate and explore what your agent's needs are from a training perspective. And now that's clear and definite programs and systems and classes that can be put in place so that the agent feels confident when they're kind of stepping out and dealing with this. And right now we've got a roughly 60-day window to where we can create some practice opportunities, right? In order, some mock events so that they can get comfortable when the thing is fully instituted.
Okay, sounds great. we'll
Cool.
keep pushing away and get more agents.
Love it. See you next week.
Yeah.
Aaron, question for you, and Jazz, I'll get to you next, and then Ray.
Hi, yes. So a realtor friend of mine was told by her brokerage that whatever is written into the buyer agent agreement as far as compensation goes, that's the max we can be paid. So if the seller is offering, let's say 3%, and it's in our buyer agreement that we're getting 2.5%, we can't get that 3%. We can only get that 2.5%. Is that accurate?
No. So in the 2.5%, you're asking the buyer if, let's say, you normally charge 3%. If the seller's paying the 3%, then there is no pass-through cost to the buyer. But if the seller's only paying, let's say, 1% and you normally charge 3%, that means that the buyer can contribute up to 2% to complete your entire 3%.
Okay, but there's not a cap based on what we put into our buyer agreement?
Commissions are 100% negotiable. If you wanted to charge the 10% to your buyer, I don't know why you would, but if you wanted to charge 10% to your buyer, you know, commissions are always and always will be 100% negotiable.
Got it. Thank you.
You're welcome. Hey, Jazz.
Hey, Dee.
Hey, what's going on?
So, how are they going to be enforcing that everybody, you know, working with buyers has this agreement signed before they start touring? And also, would we need to send them with the offers? Why would the sellers or the seller's agent be interested in that particular, whether we have a buyer's agent, you know, agreement or not?
You know, that's a great question. I'm not sure what the mechanism of enforcement will be. And as I said, it might be something similar to, you know, when we were doing PEDS. But so if you look at it this way,
again, that is some, you know, whatever agreement I have with my buyer is between me and my buyer. Why should seller's agent know how much am I charging? You know, I could be charging $100 or whatever.
Agreed. Yeah, no, totally agree with you. I totally agree with you on that. But I look at it this way: since we're going to be reaching out to our listing agent counterparts anyway, to say, hey, look, you know, I want to bring my buyer by. Do you happen to X? You know, it may just be a simple conversation. Have you had your buyer sign a buyer broker agreement? Yep, and then move on. You know, again, it's still really early, so I'm not sure how enforcement will happen. But definitely something we should probably consider to talk about. Continue to talk about. Jeanette?
I heard that the DOJ is going to be weighing in on this, so maybe that has something to do with it.
Well, the DOJ was part of the whole lawsuit locomotive, right? That was another big thing that happened. The DOJ was, you know, running and gunning with some of the plaintiffs to kind of take down NAR. And I suspect as courts are still mulling over these settlement terms, there may be some additional iterations to address exactly what Jazz is talking about, which is the enforcement of the buyer broker agreement. But I think we all have to stay tuned to see what may come in the pending weeks and months. Scott Tufnell. Hey, Scott. You with me, Scott?
Hey there, can you hear me?
I sure can. How's it going?
Mute didn't work. Hey, thanks for putting this on. Just want a quick comment regarding the question about if third parties, sellers pay commission offering 3% and the buyer's agreement only says 2%, what happens to the excess? There's actually a clause in that agreement that talks about what happens with the excess. It could go as a credit to the buyer, or it could go stay in with the buyer's brokerage.
That's correct. Yeah.
So yeah, you're not gonna, if seller's offering you 3% and your buyer agreement only says 2%, it doesn't mean you're gonna lose that 1%.
That's correct.
You did it.
Yeah, that's correct. 100%. Thanks for that, Scott. Hey, Ted.
Hey, how's it going? Thank
Good,
you so
man. How
much
you doing?
Hope everyone's well. Thank you so much for putting this on. I just had a kind of more of a theory question. What in your thoughts or opinion, why are we doing all of this? Why, how is this making sense? I just was hoping maybe you could share. I get that we have to do it. That's not what I'm arguing or asking. I'm just trying to find out what is the motivation, like what is behind all this? Like,
That's probably the easiest question of the day. So as I look, so things that have happened, and again, I put on a presentation a while back in terms of the history of NAR and how this all came to pass. And this is, by the way, not the first time there has been a major lawsuit against the National Association of Realtors and Consumers. It happened in 1950. It happened in 1962. It happened in 1980. There have been several of these events that have happened over time, from since the formation of the National Association of Realtors. But what really drew reference to these, and again, I'm going to talk about these lawsuits, which go back as far as 2016, is the fact that consumers again, look at the day and time in which we live, right? Real estate used to be a proprietary industry. You had to come to someone like us in order to transact real estate. The dawn of the 2000s created the internet as we know it, and different providers and consumers having access to the same data, essentially, that we have as practitioners. And then you had consumers getting less value of service from some practitioners and feeling like, why am I paying for this? And that's that was kind of the precipice of some of these lawsuits. It was like, well, wait a minute. It feels as though these people are colluding to continue to charge us this money, and particularly sellers. So sellers were saying, exactly what many of you have said. Why am I paying for the buyer's commission? It's, theoretically, why shouldn't that be a cost borne to the buyer? And so that was kind of where all of this really started and gained momentum and steam. Because of the loss in terms of the Stitzer Barnett case, and that was substantial. And that was really just about Kansas City agents or agents who practiced in Kansas City. But then you all of a sudden had this domino effect of all these other people, because attorneys saw an opportunity and they said, oh, well, geez, if it happened in Kansas City, then it's happening in Chicago, and it's happening in California, and it's happening in Georgia, and so on and so on. And so the DOJ and the National Association of Realtors have long since had a very contentious relationship. NAR is a very powerful lobbying organization, very, very powerful trade organization. It makes up, so if you look at NAR or us as realtors, we make up about 1/3 of the economy of the United States. And so there's a lot that rides on this. We look at it fairly lightly because we just do our day-to-day business and we're not looking at the global picture of this. But so there's been a lot of contention around this, and particularly around the fact that our language, even though we say is 100% negotiable, sometimes leans into I know I said negotiable, but we charge 6%, and that's what we're charging you. You know what I mean? And so that was the epicenter of a lot of these lawsuits. So this is just kind of the fallout is, basically, let's make adjustments to what this language looks like. Let's make subtle adjustments to how this process takes place, so that at the end of the day, everybody's happy. That's kind of, a real short answer to your question, Ted.
Okie dokie. Thank you.
Okay. Other questions, guys? All right. It looks like we may have kind of tapped to the end. If there are no other questions, go ahead.
One question where I think we're going to run into some problems. What if a buyer signs multiple buyer agreements?
Good question.
Yeah, great question.
Yeah.
So just like a listing agreement. So first of all, let's look at it this way, Ray. What if a buyer signed multiple buyer broker agreements? It's only the one that actually brings it to the finish line is the one who's getting paid, right?
We've got an agent here in town who signs a buyer broker agreement.
Mm-hmm.
And if he hears that they're in escrow on another property,
mm-hmm.
he swings in there saying, I'm requiring a commission on this deal, even though he's not Bruce.
That it's just like a listing agreement, right? It's
and he swoops in there and he goes out there to kill the deal, then he negotiates his commission.
These are things that we need to explain to the buyer. And again, I use the word commitment, right? This is how we This is how we firm our commitments with the people that we do business with, which is Mr. and Mrs. Buyer. You and I are in a relationship, kind of like a marriage. I'm going to do my best for you, and these are the promises I'm making to you and the services I'm going to provide in exchange for X of compensation for the services that I'm providing to you. If we're having these meaningful conversations up front, I think over time you're going to see a significant reduction in opportunities of multiple arrangements and such as it exists right now, because pretty much buyers at this point in time are just looking for the best deal or who's going to get it done. I think it's going to change significantly, and I think you're going to start to see buyer brokers want to enter into fewer relationship with serial buyer broker agreement signers, because they're going to want the commitment of, are you doing business with me or not, right?
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting mix.
Yeah. I mean, and again, guys, none of this is going to be overnight. We're going to see a slow titration of many of these things before there's any real gelling or solidity of this. But it's if I could say anything, let's look inwardly and let's look at what our behavior is and the things that we do to facilitate business, and let's just create best practices. We can't control other practitioners, at least at the moment, but we can definitely look at best practices for us. Emily, question, you've got your hand?
Oh, yes. I just think over the past several years, there's been a wave of people working directly with listing agents, right? It's something that didn't happen, maybe a decade ago. And so buyers are very savvy today, and I feel like there are just going to be many more buyers going directly to listing agents if they know that they're not having to pay a fee for their transaction.
Well, but the listing agent has no agency with them. So if there's no incentive for the listing agent to work with that buyer, then there will be no reason to establish agency. So even if a buyer went to a listing agent directly, the listing agent is under no obligation to assume an agency relationship with that buyer.
Unless they reduce their fee, say they would normally go back to the 6%. If they work it out with the seller, well, if I represent both sides, I'll take 4% rather than 6%.
Right.
So there is an incentive there. They're having
Yeah, you're talking about what we call a dual variable. So yeah, yes. I mean, you might see more of a rise of a dual variable, but so look at it this way. You used 6% as an example. Mm-hmm. If a listing agent is getting 6%, it probably doesn't make sense to me why that listing agent wouldn't want cooperative compensation to bring buyer brokers to that property. Because again, it's a marketing effort, right? The money's not just to line my pocket. The money is so I can generate a buzz and get the parties who have the buyers in front of this house, so this house gets sold. So if the listing agent's getting 4, 5, 6%, I can't see why there wouldn't still be an opportunity at a cooperative compensation.
And when you write the buyer's agreement, would you write it in a way where you said, okay, if the seller offers compensation, then I won't charge you a fee. However, if the seller offers partial compensation, I'll charge you the difference?
Absolutely. So if you look at the buyer broker agreements, there's absolutely options for that whole thing completely. Okay. Yeah, complete for that scenario you just described.
Okay, thank you. Thanks again for this today too.
Absolutely, Emily. Thanks for participating. I really appreciate it. Other questions, guys?
I have a quick comment.
Sure. Hey,
hi. On the RPA, isn't there an area where we can designate for the seller to, where there's I don't know exactly how it is, but you can disclose that, okay, there's the buyer is compensating a particular amount, and we can ask the seller to make up the difference. Let's say there's an agreed upon 2.5%, and the buyer is going to pay 2%.
Yes. Okay. You're exactly right. And so that kind of satisfies, under our fiduciary capacity, the duty to account for all monies, right? Because none of this changes the fact that we still have to account for all monies, right? That's, a tenant that won't ever go away from what we do. But that's just essentially where you're accounting for all monies. In other words, it's basically saying I'm not slipping you $100 under the table, right? It's accounting for all monies above board and full transparency. So there's probably going to be some manipulation. The other thing is you guys are going to see adjustments and changes in some of the forms that are existing right now to remove some language, to insert some language. And that might happen fairly quickly. You know, when I say quickly, like within a 6-month time frame or so. So yeah, constantly on the lookout for that. But yeah, absolutely. There is that language in the RPA that would address exactly what you just shared.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Sandra.
Hi there. So I might have missed this, but if the buyer goes directly to the listing agent, will the listing agent need to have a buyer broker agreement as well?
So if the buyer went directly to the listing agent, and the buyer was offering compensation to the listing agent, is that what you're asking?
Right.
Then, a buyer broker agreement would need to be in place because that's the establishment of a different agency.
Or if the seller was offering buyer broker agreement or compensation.
Yes, there would still need to be a buyer broker agreement in place because you're still representing two different sides, two different agencies.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. And then I did have a question on the messaging as far as like, you said you can put concessions on the MLS.
Correct.
Could you put a seller credit that is equal to the amount of the offering of the I see you laughing.
Saw that in the chat and I meant to get to that. And I would say potentially yes, as long as it's within that 3% of the purchase price guideline from the lender. So one thing that Joseph mentioned is we have to keep in mind what the lender will allow because we still have to maintain the LTV and all that good stuff. So
well, I'm assuming if the buyers are paying for it and then the sellers are crediting, it's going to be a wash on the lending side.
But we always want to make sure what's allowable with the lender. I mean, it makes sense to me, it makes sense to you, but the lender may go, oh, hell no. So we want to make sure that we're staying on the right side of the lender for sure too. But yeah, I think potentially, absolutely, the seller could offer a concession that could be equal to the amount of what a buyer broker's fee may be.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Okay. Hey, Tad.
Okay, so as I just listened to all of these thoughts and comments, it just further reinforces just how unnecessary and convoluted all this really is. So I guess my next question then is, and you've probably already touched on this, but I unfortunately was late to the Zoom. When you're sitting in front of your seller and you're talking about listing their property, and you have a discussion which has been had by all of us agents for decades upon decades about when you talk about compensation. How are we framing this now with them? If I say to the seller, look, my fees are X, then do I say, and I also would recommend that you consider offering some type of compensation to a buyer's broker? How does that, just walk me through how that conversation happens now.
That's a great point, Ted. And I don't think there should be a significant change in how you do business right now. And what I mean by that is, again, that's part of your strategy, offering a cooperating fee to a buyer broker. And, just as you position it now is probably the way you're going to position it in the future. Mr. and Mrs. Seller, I think this is a great house. We're going to price it as this. This is what I'm going to put in your pocket. These are the fees that I charge. Keep in mind, I do cooperate with a buyer broker so that they're bringing their buyers to your property so that we can get the widest exposure, right? That language, I don't think is going to change, nor do I think it should change, because that is a conversation that we always and probably will always have. Now, you may occasionally, or more than occasionally, have a seller that says, I heard that this, that I don't have to pay for a cooperating buyer broker. Mr. and Mrs. Seller, that is true, and that has always been true. But do we want as many eyeballs on this property as possible? right? Would you work for free? The same language that we're using right now, we're still going to be using and employing that language in every marketing appointment that we have with a seller, right? We're not just showing up and going, hey, it's X. We're telling them what the value of our service is and why, and how we plan to market that home to get it sold, right? We don't list a property, we market a property so that it gets sold, that it moves across the market. That's what our job is. So the language in that case, I think, will remain the same with very few adjustments. Does that make sense, Tad?
It makes 100% sense. I think what's not making sense is what are we really doing here? Like you know what I mean? It's like,
I know what you mean. I think
it's just,
that every morning when I say, why do I pay taxes? Damn it, because the government made me. No, I totally get you, Tad. Yeah, I mean, it's a head scratch for all of us, but I think in the long term, as we stave off disgruntled consumers in some respects, overreaching events that have happened over time, I think this is just the next evolution in real estate and how we do real estate.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely, Tad. Emily, hands up.
One last comment. So I watched a video yesterday that said that while you cannot list the commission in the MLS, you can have it on your brokerage website. So someone commented about, oh, listing agents their phones are going to be blowing up with questions asked about commission.
Sure.
You can post them on your personal website.
That's right.
And that would avoid,
That's
potentially
right.
help mitigate some of those calls.
Just as long as it's not on an MLS platform, that's the only change. And by the way, those of you who've been around long enough to remember the books and pre-internet, that's kind of how it was done pre-internet. That's how we communicated if a commission would be paid. We had these books that looked like phone books. There were no brokerage websites, but there would be signs and windows of a brokerage's office, things like that. So we're kind of hearkening back to some of the ways we used to do real estate when it's proprietary, with a different twist to it.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Lavanya.
Do you forecast companies like Redfin offering flat commissions to brokers now?
I do. I think you're going to see a lot of brokerages and broker agents offering flat fees. I think you see flat fees now. Again, some brokerages that have mandated their agents with minimums, I think they're going to be scrambling to make some adjustments for sure to remain competitive in some respects.
One more question. I do see some agents have created some kind of like an auction sites through the brokerages for people to bid on it. You see those coming more and more?
That's a good question. I'm not sure. I in some cases, an auction might be a solid way of marketing a property, particularly unusual properties or properties that are not part of a generic consumer base. But I honestly don't know or don't think that you're going to see a proliferation of more and more auction type of offerings from agents.
Thank you. But
Sure.
how do we protect ourselves from these flat fee buyer representations?
So when you say protect ourselves, tell me what you mean.
Protect in the sense like, how do we advertise ourselves that, okay, these are the services we are providing, pay us like 1% or like 2%. Bay Area market is like around the 2 million price range. If I'm asking the buyer for like 40,000, I don't think they'll be paying us. They will be running to the flat fee brokers, right? So how do we market ourselves?
So my answer to that is maybe they'll be running a flat fee. There have been flat fee brokers forever. When I got in the business and real estate was proprietary, there was Help You Sell, Assist to Sell, all kinds of flat fee companies. They've always been around. Again, I think if your value proposition is strong and your service offerings are strong, like you have here at Radius, I think it's hands down. Again, you have a $200 attorney and you have a $2,000 attorney. Why would I pay a $2,000 if I can get it for $200? Because the $2,000 attorney gets the job done. with the best outcome. And that's no different than the services that you guys offer and provide. Is, you know, you're paying me a little bit more than that flat fee guy because I get the job done, right? You know, I'm giving you that ultimate concierge service. I'm making you work the least. You know, I'm providing you a high level of care and service. That's pretty much what it is.
Thank you.
And we can talk about that again. We're going to be having lots of sessions on centered around negotiating, how to navigate with your buyer broker, how to navigate through some of the flat fee offerings you're going to see a lot of buyers agents try and scramble to. Again, you know, when you're trying to stay relevant, lots of people do lots of aberrant things, but not necessarily in best practice or in the best interest of their customer. Other questions, guys? You got me. I'm live and in person. Other questions?
What should we expect next from Radius, D? What's upcoming on this topic?
Great question, Sam. So upcoming, as I've mentioned a few times, is that we are going to continue to keep our finger on the pulse of everything that's happening and keeping you guys informed. I think it's important that we continue to have additional sessions on this. I know there's lots of questions that are still swirling. There'll be additional questions as you guys move forward. So we'll continually address those things. As far as Radius goes, and you know how that impacts you here at Radius, again, we are always looking at being ahead of, I won't even say our competitors, I'll say our peers in the business that best serve you. Again, I mentioned earlier, that's why we've always respected what your business model is, right? We've set no thresholds, no minimums that restrict you. We allow you to practice in a supportive way that fits the best design for your business model. You know, we're going to continually look at what makes sense and what best practices are for you and for us as a company that continues to serve you at a high level. And then, like I said, if you've not used Mel and if you've not used TXM or have not heard about TXM, which is our transaction management suite in our Radius Office app, that will be rolling out within the next 60 days or so. So stay tuned for that. That is absolutely going to streamline a lot of your business. It's going to help you function on a day-to-day. It's going to take some of the worrisome things and tasks that you guys do on a daily and allow you to have more meaningful conversations with your customer base so that they can understand what this process looks like as well.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Dee, for your expertise and for your support on this as the story is continuing to unfold. We really appreciate having you here, and thank you so much, everyone, for joining us for today's session. Like Dee said, we'll definitely be having lots of follow-up conversations surrounding NAR and what have you. So I think that'll be it for today, and so we'll kind of conclude here. But I hope everyone has a great rest of their Tuesday, and we'll see you again soon.
Thank you very much, Dee and Sam and everybody. Thank you.
And happy anniversary, Jim. Jim's crossed our mile threshold. So
One year. With
1 year.
Radius
Love it.
And 130 some odd agents.
Stellar. Love that, Jim. I'll see you next week.
Okay, guys.
All right,
Sam,
guys.
come on down also.
Sounds
I will.
You got him, man. Come on.
I got him.